And welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report. We have, of course, here on the third hour on Thursdays, Tim Alexander is here all hour on Tuesdays. And at the bottom of the hour, we'll be having Chris Harris, that's his radio name, our nuclear safety expert. He does have some update reports today. And Tim, let's roar through this news because there's some very hot things going on. I guess May 31st is doomsday for the so-called Patriot Act, which is really not patriotic. It's trying to destroy the Fourth Amendment, and the fools, both in all the news media, including the Fox or false news network, and their lying pieces of human, what I call info whores, are trying to tell us it's a good idea to have, metadata gathering and surveillance of American citizens, et cetera, to, quote, stop terrorism, which they darn well know they're supporting ISIS and terrorism. They know exactly who is in this country and where they are, and there's 37 civil detention training camps by Muslims, which shouldn't have armed training camps inside our continental United States. To me, it's disgusting that we support ISIS and ISIL at the same time we allow the Quds Force militia in Iraq to call in bomber runs. We're creating this disaster, and we're letting towns like Palmyra fall and Christians and Muslims die at the hands of maniacs, including
it really is shameful that the Christian churches have not, the preachers and priests and so forth are not preaching to their flock about what's happening. It's our tax dollars and American power that is involved in the killing of Christians in several places now, especially Syria and Iraq.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's where the church started, in fact.
I mean, you talk about a upside-down world. America is at least nominally a Christian nation. Nothing like we used to be, but we still the overwhelming majority of Americans describe themselves as Christians.
Exactly.
Our tax dollars, our money, our military power is supporting these evil clowns, ISIS, that are crucifying people, killing them, chopping their heads off, and everything else because
we have a Muslim convert head of the CIA under Obama. We have a Muslim apologist and Muslim trained in a school in Indonesia who's not an American citizen and shouldn't qualify as president. They call him POTUS, but he isn't. And we have a late-night TV host who's a lying piece of human garbage, 32nd-degree Mason, high-level Satanist, put there by Zbigniew Brzezinski. And remember that Canadian comedian that did a show, The Truman Show, talk about this literally individual born, and his entire life was literally put on a 24-hour TV, we call, almost this is before we call these crazy shows like, the live TV shows of a family, and I don't even want to mention some of them. But what we have now is a situation where we have the Photoshop president who really is a completely manufactured, marching us like lemmings, and the only one standing up, by the way, of all these candidates is Rand Paul. Rand Paul is the only one, Dr. Rand Paul is the only one standing up against the Patriot Act, of course, the Tea Party and many other, quote, patriots. And we need to realize that this government, in any way, shape, or form, trying to, quote, reauthorize the Patriot Act is a violation. It's not helping anything.
The whole act was unconstitutional. It was a scam. It was written before the false flag attack on 9/11. Everything anymore is a B-grade movie out of Hollywood. Let me show you where where we're going here. Veterans Today, and I have a link on my to the article on my news blog Europe. If you want to find it, do Google search Lord Sterling Europe. Anyway. Photo proof that nuclear war has begun in Yemen by Israel, and it just you can't make this craziness up. They show a number of photos people at the scene took. Sometime they were only done with a camera, a telephone camera, but they're very clear. Experts that have looked at them and say with absolute certainty that this is a neutron or weapon that's going off.
Right.
And they have two F-16s that were crashed that clearly had just been repainted in Royal Saudi Air Force colors, but they were of a type that was only, that particular type of F-16 was only supplied to Israel in the Middle East. And, of course, Israel is clearly on the side. I mean, they're treating ISIS fighters, and they're staging them and everything else. But Israel, they have no boundaries. They have no sense of propriety, no sense of proportion, no sense of morality. They have now, in two cases in Yemen, just very, very recently, used nuclear weapons. Granted, they're low-yield tactical neutron bombs, but they're still nuclear weapons. They've crossed the big red line. And of course,
what's called the nuclear Rubicon,
which is controlled by them, does not report it. You have to go to the alternative media to see the proof.
Tim, I want to use a new term now. I want to call it like scamtastic. This one is going to be called the nuclear Rubicon. And when they cross it in Yemen, it means they're going to use it in the battlefield. Yeah, they crossed it.
I mean,
people need to understand.
It's nuts. I have a wild imagination. I can't make this stuff up.
No, in fact, the thing is,
and there was no great strategic advantage to this. This is that crazy Eastern European Yiddish in your face. We're going to do it. What are you going to do about it? You know.
Well, Tex Mars is on next. Tex Mars is on next Friday, and he's got an interesting bulletin. I get all his bulletins. And he's one of the greatest activists who explains that modern Talmudic Judaism is complete Satanism, polytheistic garbage. It's not, and this is one of the things that's taught incorrectly in Canadian, American, European, New Zealand, whatever, Christian teaching schools, that Jews basically are monotheistic. They revere the Old Testament. They don't teach it in yeshivas. What they teach is the Talmud, and they teach the writings of the rabbis, because they even say in the rabbinical schools in New York and elsewhere, they're closer to Harry Potter, and in fact, God consults them, because when he can't figure things out, he consults the rabbis.
What a blasphemy! What
right, and the point is,
outrageous blasphemy. But you're
right,
correct,
and if you actually listen to the sexual weirdness of the multi-god systems that they actually believe in the Talmud, which they try to hide from Christian pastors. The fact is, and this is what I call it, the ancient Israelites, like my ancestors, the Cohens, were monotheistic. They believed in the one true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Modern Talmudic Judaism.
Blood in you. The 96% of the Jews in Israel and around the world are not Hebrewic. They're
right.
not Hebrews.
Yeah, but it's not even just a genetic.
They're from the you know.
Right. Well, Khazaria
and their own people, their own geneticists in Israel have proved that, by the way, with DNA studies.
Right, but it's not just the physical genetics. Remember the king, basically 900 years ago, declared that they should become Jews rather than Muslims or Christians. Just because they were attacking.
1,300 years ago. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. They were attacking repeatedly. Yeah, that's right. Well,
he was renting his army to the Eastern Holy Roman Emperor, the Eastern Emperor in Constantinople, who was fighting the Islamic because Muhammad has just started his stuff, and he was fighting the Islamic hordes, and right. the Khazar king was renting his army to them, and he was concerned because they were the religion they were following, they were Phallic worshippers, and many were homosexuals, and he said, he wanted his descendants to have a bigger army. That meant that they needed a different religion, so they would procreate more children, more young men to go in the army in the future. And he searched around. He looked at Islam. Of course, he was fighting him, so he felt he was making a great deal of money off that, so he couldn't have his people convert to Islam. He looked at Christianity, but he didn't want to be under the thumb of the emperor and the Christian religion in Constantinople. So he sent to Baghdad for some of the people, some of the rabbis that hadn't went back to Israel at the end of Babylonian captivity, and these were people
right.
that had went into this Talmudic stuff, and he converted his nation, the Khazar kingdom, into Talmudic Judaism, and it has just superficial connection to the Israel of the Old Testament and Judaism of the Old Testament.
Exactly. Very good summary, because in other words, it has nothing to do with the ancient Jewish people, genetically, historically, spiritually.
It's a scam.
We have, we had some things we discussed in the break. We talked about the state of it's a real hell. Now, if you're Jewish and you have read the Talmud, you know that we know what you know now. If you need to repent, you need to return to the faith of your ancient ancestors, and it doesn't matter if you're genetically, quote, Hebrew, you're Khazarian, because it turns out a lot of the people are now new Messianic believers that have actually cast off the Talmud and all its garbage are actually Khazarian Jews from Russia and the former Soviet Union CIS nations, and then they've come to Israel and become Messianic Jews, if you want to call her Hebrews. So it doesn't matter what your genetic, it matters what your spiritual DNA is, and the fact is, this is a big assault against the, quote, extreme, ultra-Orthodox maniac Jews with the curlicues on the side of their head, and, of course, the secular Jews like Netanyahu and Lieberman that are basically globalist maniacs that don't care whether or not most of the citizens in Israel, when they use the Samson option, will ultimately die in a hail of nuclear and missile attacks.
You're totally right, Dr. Bill. The thing is, there is a very warped behavior from this crowd, from Netanyahu, from several of his cabinet people, and from the people that they basically own in the U.S. administration, the U.S. Congress. To give you an example, and I don't cover sports because I'm not a sport expert. I like various games. I like to go to hockey and football and so forth, but I don't consider myself a sportscaster or anything like that. Now, the FIFA, which is the organization for the World Cup in soccer, it's a global organization. There was a raid yesterday in Switzerland that the Swiss police arrested a number of their top officials for corruption, and the corruption was in taking kickbacks for the media, international media, and marketing rights to the tournaments. And I suspect that probably goes on just about every big sports organization. But in any case, this was done directly on a warrant issued by the United States government. The day before this, a couple U.S. senators got up and said that the president of this organization, Blatter is his name, B-L-A-T-T-E-R, should not be reelected because he was on the brink of awarding Russia the right to hold the World Cup in 2018. But it goes way, way beyond Russia. The real thing, and I've got several links on my site, Europe Today, on this, but the Veterans Today did a really great story. And it said this was just ahead of an expulsion vote for Israel from the organization because Israel is acting as a rogue nation. She's in gross violation of the rights of the Palestinian people, et cetera, and the United States government, which is basically controlled by the global banking cartel and the Zionists, the United States government had a conniption fit, and we basically are now using our justice system internationally to defend Israel. And I mean, it's so nuts. It's like
here's the way to fix the problem.
The size, not much bigger than Rhode Island, the size of Wales, or
right. We
jump through hoops and do all kind of stuff and give them untold billions of dollars. You couldn't make that up in a million years.
I always like to talk solutions, Tim.
The dog, it's the tip of the tail wagging the dog.
Yeah. Here's a solution, Tim. Solution is real simple. We annex the state of Israel. We basically take over control of their military so they can't start a nuclear war. We also tell their enemies that we're no longer going to support ISIS or ISIL, which we are, along with the state of It's a Real Hell, which they even have Baghdadi, one of their senior so-called generals. It's an actor from the Mossad.
Yeah,
we basically say, we also, and this goes right back to Truman, who the Jews tried to force him to authorize it would become a religious, so-called Talmudic Judaistic state. They are ultra, how can I say it, racist against anybody, even other Jews, like Falasha Jews and black Jews from South Africa, which are actually...
The Ethiopian Jews have had a terrible time, and they recently had a big riot Israel, in a number of years ago, did the right thing. It spent a lot of money to get them out of Ethiopia and a couple other places and brought them to Israel. But then once they were there, it really did very little for them, and they were so... there's a pecking order in Israel. If you are an Ashkenazi Jew born in Israel, number one. An Ashkenazi Jew born in Europe, number two. Ashkenazi Jew born in the United States or elsewhere, number three. Serapedic Jew, which are the true descendants of those Jews that didn't become first Christians. Then you're fourth, and then other Jews, like the Ethiopian Jews, which are of color, you know.
You call them Falasha Jews.
And then everybody else, you're not even on the list. And it's a hyper-racist society, and, you know, it's just... offensive, whether it's in Israel, whether it's
but there's
many racist things.
But describing it's like
you treat people as people. You know, they're children of God.
You're a pathologist looking at this like his geopolitical pathologist. I'm looking at it as an ICU doctor saying, how can I resuscitate this patient and repent them and cut off the disturbing and gangrenous limbs of their bad belief systems? And the first thing we need to do is, number one, we need to start getting Christians to recognize that the viewpoints of so-called Jews is we are soulless dogs. Everyone other than themselves.
Two-legged, soulless animals. But you know,
and we have to realize they're not ancient
Jews. That's a minority, I think.
No. Let me explain.
And they're not like that. I don't think most Jews are like that.
Well, no. I have good friends like Dr. Meir Eisenstein. They're great humanitarians, but the fact is, most of them reject Talmudic Judaism. Even if they go to they go to what we call a Reform Jewish. Synagogue.
Synagogue, yeah.
You're right. And a lot of Jews have become secular agnostics. In fact, the vast majority of Jews are secular agnostics because they see the sexual deviancy, the multi-god systems, and everything that's so abhorrent, just even to the logic of a decent person.
And they look at, the people with these fur hats on and their weird clothes and their
right, so that's why a lot of the, if you look down through the last couple centuries, the vast majority of the early tip of what I call social secular humanism are Jewish because they rejected Talmudic Judaism, including Shabtai and Jakob Frank, who, according to Barry Chamish, who's been on the show as a Jewish man originally from Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Barry.
Right, Barry's a great guy, and the fact is, he rejects all this Talmudic garbage, and he knows it's garbage, okay? And he also knows it's tied directly to labor Zionism and the rise of Nazism, because 122,000 of the Nazi SS were basically Talmudic Jewish, secular, agnostic.
Don't forget the guy that retired in Argentina. Dear old Adolf was 1/4 Rothschild. Wasn't just 1/4 Jewish.
Exactly.
He was Rothschild, and that's the.
So was Mr. Abe Lincoln. He was another Rothschild spinoff, wasn't he?
Well, maybe. But we
got pretty good proof for it. I have other sources.
Raiders supposedly was, and my great grandfather hunted him down and took care of him on their way to Louisville, Kentucky one time.
There you go. Welcome back, and our nuclear safety expert, Chris Harris, is here with Tim Alexander. Chris, you got 3 big articles, so we're going to have to back off and let you talk a lot because we got a lot to cover here. Fukushima Daiichi cleans most contaminated water, in comma, not really. The second article, TEPCO reports latest findings on technical inquiry into how accident at Fukushima unfolded. And the third one, Japan nuclear engineer U.S. reactor at risk of supercriticality during recent emergency. That's something scary, in quotes. Damaged nuclear fuel rods and fuel fragments found at plant conditions reported as, quote, seriously degraded. And there's a video clip there. What plant are you referring to, that Japan nuclear engineer?
Well, he was referring to the North Anna nuclear plant, and just outside of Washington, D.C.
Right.
And
wow.
Yeah, so it's applicable to many places. Now, the accident he was talking about was an earthquake that happened August 23rd, 2011. So
yes,
I know we talked.
That's the one that damaged the Washington Monument too, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
Yeah, and that's why they had one of these guys. Actually, it's another criminal that put in a few $100 million there. He's the guy that was involved with the derivatives markets, and he put in a couple of $100 million to look like a good guy to rebuild the Washington Monument. But this guy is like the devil incarnate. Let's start with those first 2 articles. What did you find new?
Well, let me just say, Simply Info does a really good job of digging up some information and keep each other informed about good stuff. So simplyinfo.org. And Fukushima, let me just read a little bit of the article to your audience. And this Fukushima Daiichi cleans most contaminated water. Not really. Now, here's what's going on. TEPCO announced that they had cleaned most of the contaminated water at the Fukushima Daiichi. Now, we're talking about all the thousands of tanks. And they have been cycling using the ALPS system, we said the Advanced Liquid Processing System, to go ahead and clean out as much of the cesium and strontium that they can. But it ignores, and this is what this article is, the focus of this article is that it ignores other important isotopes to remove, including cobalt-60, iodine-129, and tritium. And so it doesn't remove any of that. And here we're talking about, and plus it also says that they're almost done. Now, the article doesn't, but TEPCO says that they're almost done. Yet they still have 180,000 tons of water to be processed. Now, we did discuss out of 500,000 tons. So they're not done.
No.
We've also discussed that as a byproduct from a lot of this filtration system and the processing is sludge. And this is nasty stuff. I mean, what do you do with it? And this is this article does discuss about TEPCO also began dismantling some of the tank farm, and it has not mentioned how they will manage worker exposures during this dismantling. So there's a risk to the workers, but not only that, it's also a waste management risk, and they many of these early tanks held radioactive sludge. There is no explanation in TEPCO's handout how they will remove or manage that sludge. I included that handout to you as a link so that you could look at it also. There's been a recent alert about how there's hydrogen buildup in the filtration system, in the filtration canisters, because once you're done using the filters, then you have to store them. They're also radioactive. And what do you do with them then? Well, just like the WIP hydrogen buildup, the waste isolation processing plant in New Mexico, well, there could be a similar process happening here, generating hydrogen, and there's no discussion on how they were going to deal with exploding canisters or keeping them from exploding. And of course, when you filter something, well, that filter is the thing that gets really filthy, dirty, full of radioactive contaminants, and you don't want that exploding and spraying it all over the place. And even the Nuclear Regulatory Agency of Japan said earlier last week that these canisters are producing hydrogen at levels that would lead to an explosion. And they did. I wanted to talk about it last week. I just could not get on the air with you last week. But that was something that is worth mentioning. So they're, once again, painting a rosy picture where it's not that rosy. It's more like poison ivy. But
yeah. To summarize, what you're saying is the North Annan reactor near Washington D.C. has a radiation plume that can strike the Capitol, and they're not doing anything about the same disaster planning as we had with the U.S. contracted companies that took care of Fukushima Daiichi, which are U.S. companies. We have Fukushima still rearranging the deck chairs. They don't even know how to handle the sludge. They're releasing, with their ALPS system, tremendous amounts of radioactive isotopes into the troposphere and the oceans. Most people should be aware that the airborne radiation, when it strikes North America, is probably up at 26,000 plus feet. It's not at ground level, but the oceans are being poisoned. The primary poison stream is the Kuroshio current that carries it to British Columbia, northern Washington state, and then splits. My evidence so far suggests to me that a lot of the fish coming out of Alaska is still okay, and here in Southern California, but it is killing off the great whales. Just reading off some of the links from Rentz's website, he has a good Fukushima updates. The 12th whale washes up on California beach. Leaking Fukushima containers could explode because of hydrogen. We talked about that. China warned over insane plans for new nuke plants. And by the way, China's getting backwash radiations landed over 22 provinces in China within 6 to 7 weeks after Fukushima went 4 years ago plus. Tokyo subway trains have at 5.6 quake rocks Japan. So half of the trains are rocked by an earthquake. Experts warn of hydrogen explosions at Fukushima. Japan, nowhere to store nuclear waste. They don't have any storage sites. Dangerous pipe dream of nuclear processing. Mystery black fungus found on all over the PAC Northwest fish. And that's because the radionuclides make this fungus grow like crazy. They consider it like vitamins. They activate the growth of enzymes in fungi. And TEPCO may dump Fukushima rad water into the sea. They're always dumping it. It's not may. They will. It's in brackets.
They will.
And the NRA approves restart for third nuclear plant in Ehime, E-H-I-M-E. So they're gradually reactivating plants under the death cult maniac, the president or prime minister, I guess, of Japan, Abe, who is a member of the Shinrikyo death cult, end-time world, end of the world kind of cult. People need to understand just how crazy this is, and we're not making any of this up. I mean, if I was taking really bad mushrooms and ayahuasca together with a lot of booze, I couldn't make up this stuff. Let me tell you, this is right out of the pit of hell. And people say, well, Dr. Deagle, you're just making this up, or, Tim, you're making it up, or, Chris Harris, you're making this stuff up. No, we're not. And the fact is, I want people like, if you can make contacts out there, people, remember, this is your radio show. So you can call in any hour, 800-259-5791. Just stay on topic and make your statement or comment. But I want people like Michio Kaku and his 40,000 scientists who belong to the American scientific community that would say, I'd like to have other people. I want to get some dialogue, intellectual fencing, and I want to have some abuse. Where is my abuse? I really am getting so frustrated that I don't even get my abuse anymore. Because I'm thinking, well, doesn't somebody come in and disagree? I want some disagreement, and I want them to be not ad hominem attacks like they don't like me because I talk too fast or interrupt my guests and all that crap. That's well known. I want to say, what's the technical, scientific, radiological, and other reasons why you're full of it, Deagle? No, don't worry about the fact that there's whales washing up on the beach, the 12th whale washed up in California. Don't worry about the fact that there's no salmon run anymore, smelt run, and there's no orca whales, so they don't even sing in the oceans anymore because there's no babies. What people need to understand here is we're seeing an extinction level event in slow-mo. And if they think this is just going to be a mild problem, and it's not just the northern hemisphere, there's pulses of radiation going across to Western Australia, New Zealand, to the southern hemisphere. So, I don't know. I tell people, where the hell's my abuse? I want it. I'm missing it. Please, abuse us with good questions and statements, but no ad hominem attacks. Where is our abuse? Welcome back, and Chris, I think you want to read a press release. This press release 2015, which I'm going to cut and paste over so people can read it, from Tokyo Electric Power Corporation. My God, I mean, you have to be sitting down with your tray table in the locked and upright position, have your seatbelt on, and be taking a double dose of calm mind before you actually read this damn stuff. Read it.
Okay, well, I'll just preface it with what you were saying before about we had discussed the venting system and their non-working venting system.
Yeah, it's called a paper-mache one they did in Japan, where they did a real Mark I upgrade here in North America. So if they had a breakout in the system and they build up hydrogen, it's going to blow up the reactor core containment. And they knew that. They even had arguments between Duke's engineers in Japan whether they should vent or not, and the other guy said, tap him on the shoulder real hard, like, don't you get it, guys? This is a faux, F-A-U-X. It's a false system. It's a paper-mache. It's a Hollywood stunt. It's not real. It won't work. And that's why the reactors lost containment.
That's right. And this report, May 20th, 2015, is now releasing that information after they had investigated for the last 4 years.
We said 3 years ago.
Right. We talked
3
about
years
it a long time ago. So here, let me give you some of the highlights of this. Venting system, yet another portion of the inquiry. This is what the report is looking into whether Unit 2's emergency system to vent steam into the atmosphere in order to release pressure and containment vessel worked properly. Well, we know it didn't. And it goes on to say that the system was designed to vent steam and to prevent a more serious accident into the containment without exploding containment, basically, which is what happened in the place. And to do this, and incorporate the ruptured disk. Now, we talked about the ruptured disk, and it appears that the ruptured disk in Unit 2, with the Unit 1 and Unit 2 combination stack, did not rupture. So what happened was it allowed the venting gases from Unit 1 to backflow into Unit 2, and making it even worse because Unit 2's already had a problem, and it couldn't take the double capacity of basically radioactive steam and also contaminants. And so what happened then, Unit 2, is what it's talking about, is that it failed containment probably first. And so because of a ruptured disk, because they didn't upgrade the system as they needed to do, it caused catastrophic failure in Unit 2's system. Now, we always said there was something really wrong with Unit 2's because none of the readings or data really showed. It didn't look like anything was working in Unit 2, and yet that was the only one that didn't explode the building off of its foundation. But it also showed that the torus most likely ruptured at that point. So although there's extensive damage to all the units, 1, 2, 3, and 4, Unit 2's was special in that they faultily installed and also a misused system really made it even worse. And that's important to note that it is now coming out May 20th, 2015. Another problem, the progression of accident in Unit 2. They were talking about the determination of where the reactor pressure vessel leaked.
No, I'm reading the title here. It says progression of accident at Unit number 1.
That's right. That's right. Now they're breaking it down, but this is what needs to happen. You need to have a real failure analysis, not jumble them all together.
Right.
And they're saying now something that we had not thought possible was that the findings showed that the temperature was higher at the top of the reactor pressure vessel than on the bottom, where we would normally expect the temperature to be higher at the bottom where the fuel is. And this indicates that there was a steam leak, a massive steam leak, at the top of the reactor pressure vessel into the containment vessel. Remember, one sits within the other.
Right.
And there's going to have to be a lot of failure analysis, and it's not supposed to fail there at the head of the reactor.
But here's what would explain that. We know the reactor 1 was literally sitting right on a fault line. We know the core of the reactor, before the tsunami struck and the backup power generators were out, that the actual reactor core was breached already. So it would explain that the steam would go to the top. So reactor 1 is distinct from reactor 2 and 3. And 3 is a MOX reactor, which is very dangerous because it has plutonium in it, which is, by the way, only used if you're creating plutonium pellets for nuclear warheads. So they had a occult nuclear weapons development program, and that's why, of course, we have the senators from South Carolina pushing for MOX reactors in all the nuclear reactors in the southwestern United States. They run hot, they're extremely dangerous, and they only make plutonium pellets for warheads, period.
Well, I'd like to get into a little bit of earthquake domestically about what this last scientist, which I just saw on E&E, which was a very interesting article, was that a Japanese nuclear expert is raised the red flag about what happened at, and what can happen at any pressurized water reactor, was that they couldn't explain way back in 2011 with the North Anna earthquake, the one that damaged North Anna units 1 and 2 near Washington D.C. And we had talked about that. I know we really don't know what actually caused the reactor trip there, but it looked like a power spike. And what would cause that, other than, and we've said it on your program a long time ago, that it had to be fuel actually moving inside the core, inside banging together. And this, what this fellow is alarming everyone about. He said,
hypercriticality. That's what he's talking about, hypercriticality. By the way, because the reactor 3 is so hot, hypercriticality can happen easily from a hydrogen explosion compressing the corium in the reactor core itself or outside.
It could happen.
It can happen in the cooling pool when the fuel rod assemblies break down, which they're breaking down, so they can have hypercriticality there, which we know blew up the top of the reactor cooling pool in Reactor 3 and sent chunks of the debris 65 kilometers away from the Fukushima plant, and they landed large chunks of it 65, 75, 90 kilometers away.
Just off the top of my head, what is that in miles?
Well, that's going to be around 40 miles to 50 miles.
That's a long way. That was a hell of a blast.
Yeah, it was called a nuclear explosion. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason why I guess I'm bringing this up, I'm glad to see that other people were thinking along those lines. It means that we weren't totally out for lunch when we raised that concern. I raised it personally.
Well, I think that they went back to the drawing board and they're quietly tending to agree with us, as to say the reason why we're not getting abuse is because there's no basis for abuse. I'm not talking about ad hominem. I'm talking about scientific abuse. If you have a proper theory, which I'm putting forward in my book, Dr. U, I want it to be attacked. I want people to say, Dr. Deagle, the plasma physics that you've talked about and the epigenetics you talked about in your book are craziness. No. Just like when we talked about Fukushima Daiichi, everything we proposed, yourself, Chris, you've done an excellent job, and I researched and talked to other nuclear scientists and safety experts, etc. The fact is that what we've said is solid scientifically, and it's now been proved step by step, months and years after we proposed this, and that's why it's shown up on E&E News, because they know we're not making this up. And it also shows that the nuclear reactor status around the world is bad. Every reactor in Switzerland, which they're going to start taking out in the next 10 to 20 years, every single one of the reactors, 5 of them in Switzerland, all sit on fault lines. Every one of the reactors in France, Germany, England, and North America are within the strike zone of the Cumbre Viejo supervolcano that can drive a 600 to 800 foot high tidal wave that can swamp these reactors along the coast of the United States, Britain, France, and Germany. People say, no, they can't do that. I say, well, you're just a fool. And yes, they can. And if you think Fukushima is bad, wait till something really catastrophic happens on the U.S. with, say, New Madrid fault when earthquakes are increasing worldwide everywhere. They know that literally 25% of the reactors in the United States are within the strike zone of New Madrid. If it goes, none of these had proper stress testing, either on a computer simulation model, rivet testing, pipes, pressure testing of the valves and control systems for their generation of power. None of them have had proper, what I call standardized testing.
Pretty hard to survive a 8 or a 9 on the Richter scale.
That's why they're saying, like, for example, The Rock's coming out this weekend with the movie San Andreas. Today, by the way, these idiots are saying we're going to have a superquake here because of alignment of planets, and they're talking, as I say, to the wrong voices. They're talking to the wrong demonic minions out there. You fools out there, they're trying to say this stuff. Guess what? We know there's big superquakes coming, but it's not today. But we do have stupidity, monumental stupidity of people lying. And luckily, some scientists are squeaking out, yeah, maybe Deagle and Harris are correct. Damn it. There it is. You don't believe it? Where is my abuse? Give it to us, please.